We often think the best way to handle a wound is to show the scar, to scream about the pain, or to demand an explanation from the person who held the blade. We've been told that closure comes from a conversation, but I want to suggest something different today. True power doesn't come from winning an argument. It comes from winning back your soul. When you are hurt, the most radical thing you can do, the thing that will truly confuse the ego of the one who hurt you, is to become a version of yourself they no longer recognize. I'm going to share with you a psychological and spiritual shift that doesn't just get him back, but gets you back. If you stay until the end, I will show you why your silence is actually the loudest message you will ever send, and how to use this moment of brokenness to build a life so beautiful it makes the past irrelevant. Close your eyes. Just for a moment. Can you feel that? Not the noise of the world, not the echo of the words they said that broke your heart, but the quiet, steady rhythm of the life still breathing inside of you. You've been looking at the horizon, waiting for a ship that was never meant to carry your dreams. You've been standing in the rain, asking the clouds why they chose to pour on you, when all along there was a sanctuary built inside your very ribs. We are so afraid of the void. We are so terrified of the space where their voice used to be. But listen, in that space, God is finally able to speak. In that silence, your purpose is finally loud enough to be heard. You thought you were being rejected, but you were being protected. You thought the door was locked against you, but it was actually a gate keeping the wolves away from the garden of your heart. Do not rush to heal. Do not hurry to forget. There is a sacredness in this stillness. Look at your hands. They are not just tools for holding on to things that want to leave. They are vessels for grace. You are a masterpiece in the middle of a stroke of divine correction. The pain you feel isn't the end of your story. It's the soil. And in the dark, in the dirt, in the places where you feel most buried, that is exactly where the seed breaks open. You are not falling apart. You are falling into place. The timing of your life is not a clock held by a man. It is a symphony conducted by the Creator. Wait for the crescendo. Trust the pauses. The most beautiful music always requires the silence between the notes. Breathe. You are here. You are loved. You are beginning again. The power of silence is perhaps the most misunderstood tool in the human emotional arsenal. We live in a world that demands a reaction for every action. A world that equates volume with strength and speed with certainty. When someone hurts you, the natural primal instinct is to strike back, to defend your territory, or to bleed out loud so they can see the damage they've caused. We think that by explaining our pain, we are being heard. We think that by shouting our worth, we are being valued. But in reality, when you react instantly to a wound inflicted by another, you are giving them the remote control to your internal state. You are telling them that they have the power to dictate your mood, your peace, and your worth. Silence, however, is the ultimate expression of emotional mastery. It is the moment you decide that your peace is more important than their provocation. It is the moment you realize that not every dog that barks deserves an answer, and not every insult deserves a defense. Choosing silence isn't about being quiet or passive. It is a loud, resonant statement of self-respect. It is the act of withdrawing your energy from a situation that no longer serves your growth. When a man hurts you and expects the tears, the phone calls, or the long paragraphs of explanation, and instead he meets a wall of calm, dignified silence, it creates a profound psychological shift. You have broken the script. You have refused to play the role of the victim. This silence acts as a mirror, forcing the other person to sit with their own actions, without the distraction of your reaction. Most people use conflict to avoid looking at themselves. By staying silent, you remove that escape hatch. You are essentially saying, I am so secure in who I am that your attempt to diminish me hasn't even registered as a threat. This is where the confusion begins for them, but more importantly, where the clarity begins for you. In that silence, you find the space to breathe. You find the gap between the trigger and the response where your freedom lives. You start to see that your energy is a currency, and you've been spending it on someone who is spiritually bankrupt. True mastery is the ability to observe an emotion without being consumed by it. It is the strength to feel the sting of betrayal, but choose to sit in your own sanctuary rather than running into their storm. This silence is your fortress. It is the boundary that says your inner world is sacred and inaccessible to those who do not know how to honor it. You are not losing the argument. You are exiting the arena entirely because you've realized the prize was never worth the fight. By choosing not to react, you reclaim your time, your focus, and your dignity. You transform from someone who is being acted upon into the conscious creator of your own experience. This is not about winning a game of psychological chess. It is about realizing you don't even want to be at the table anymore. Your silence is the bridge between the person you were, who needed their validation, and the person you are becoming, who only needs their own. It is the highest form of self-love to walk away from a fire without trying to put it out with your own blood. Breaking the feedback loop is perhaps the most profound psychological shift you can make when navigating the aftermath of being hurt. Every relationship, especially those marked by conflict or imbalance, operates on a predictable circuit of action and reaction. When someone hurts you, they often do so with a subconscious expectation of how you will respond. They expect the tears, the frantic text messages, the defensive explanations, or the retaliatory anger. In their mind, they have already written the script for the next act of your drama. By providing that expected reaction, you are inadvertently closing the circuit, feeding the loop, and giving them exactly what they need to justify their own behavior. You become a predictable variable in their equation of control, but the moment you choose to respond with an unexpected, grounded calm, or better yet, a complete withdrawal of emotional currency, you shatter that circuit. You create a pattern interrupt that forces the other person to glitch. They are standing there with an electrical plug in their hand, looking for the socket of your insecurity, but you have moved the wall. This is where you reclaim the narrative of your life. You stop being a character in their story and start being the author of your own. When you refuse to feed the loop, the other person is left holding the weight of their own actions without the distraction of your defense. Usually, when we argue back, we give the other person a hook to hang their grievances on. They point at your anger to excuse their betrayal. They point at your craziness to excuse their coldness. But when there is no feedback, there is no hook. They are forced to look into the void of their own integrity. This is not about playing a game or using silence as a weapon. It's about a spiritual refusal to participate in a vibration that is lower than your purpose. Think of your energy as a high-frequency signal. When you engage in the back and forth of a toxic loop, you are tuning your radio to a station of static and noise. Breaking the loop means you have decided to change the frequency entirely. You are saying, I see the bait, but I am no longer a fish. This creates an incredible sense of internal power because you realize that your peace is not a result of how they treat you, but a result of how you choose to respond to how they treat you. You begin to understand that you cannot control the wind, but you can absolutely control the set of your sails. By breaking the loop, you stop the bleeding of your emotional resources. You stop spending your precious mental energy rehearsing what you'll say next or replaying what they said last. Instead, that energy flows back into you. It becomes the fuel for your healing, the spark for your creativity, and the foundation of your new boundaries. You are no longer waiting for them to change so that you can feel better. You are changing your response so that their behavior no longer has a home in your heart. This is the ultimate act of liberation. You are stepping out of the cage of he said, she said, and into the sunlight of I am. You are proving to yourself that you are not a puppet moved by the strings of someone else's dysfunction. You are a sovereign being, and your response is your throne. When the loop is broken, the cycle of pain ends with you, and the cycle of power begins within you. The shift from seeking external approval to anchoring yourself in internal validation is the moment you truly become unshakable. For so much of our lives, we have been conditioned to treat our self-worth like a trophy that is held by someone else, waiting for them to hand it to us if we perform well enough, love deeply enough, or stay quiet enough. When a man hurts you, the immediate agonizing reflex is to ask why or what is wrong with me. We start dissecting our own character, our appearance, and our history, trying to find the flaw that caused the mistreatment. We look to the person who caused the wound to also provide the bandage, begging for a reason or an apology that would make us feel worthy again. But this is a spiritual trap. By asking them to validate your worth, you are giving the person who least appreciates you the power to define you. You are essentially putting your identity in the hands of someone who has already proven they don't know how to handle it with care. Internal validation is the radical act of taking that trophy back. It is the realization that your value is not a variable that changes based on someone else's inability to see it. A diamond remains a diamond even if it is buried in the mud or held by someone who thinks it's just a rock. The rock's value doesn't change. The holder's perception is simply limited. When you stop asking why did they do this and start asking who am I becoming through this, you shift from a state of victimhood to a state of alchemy. You begin to realize that the closure you've been chasing isn't something someone gives you, it is something you grow. This shift creates a profound sense of peace because it removes the need for the other person to understand your pain or admit their fault. You no longer need them to agree with your version of the truth to live in your truth. You become your own primary source of certainty. Think about the energy we waste trying to convince someone that we are enough. Every minute spent trying to prove your worth to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you is a minute stolen from your own growth. When you anchor yourself internally, you create a foundation that doesn't crack when the storm of a relationship hits. You begin to speak to yourself with the kindness you once reserved for them. You start to celebrate your own resilience, your own capacity to love, and your own journey. This internal fortress means that when someone walks away or causes you pain, it might hurt your heart, but it cannot break your soul. You are no longer a house built on the sand of someone's opinion. You are a cathedral built on the rock of your own self-knowing. This transformation is what truly confuses those who have hurt you. They expect you to be shattered because they thought they were your foundation. When they see you standing tall, not out of spite, but out of a deep, quiet realization of your own divinity, they realize they never had the power they thought they did. You have graduated from the need for their applause, and in doing so, you have found a quiet, steady joy that no one can take away. You are finally home within yourself, and that is the only place you ever needed to be. Strategic distancing is not merely a physical act of moving away. It is a sophisticated, spiritual redirection of your most precious resource, your attention. When a man hurts you, he often expects to remain the sun around which your world orbits, even if that orbit is now defined by pain, tears, or confrontation. He expects to stay relevant. He expects to be the primary topic of your conversations with friends, the ghost in your late-night thoughts, and the target of your emotional energy. By implementing strategic distancing, you are effectively removing the oxygen from the fire of his ego. Confusion arises for him, not because you are playing a game of hard to get, but because you have become impossible to find on the emotional frequency he is used to operating within. You have stopped being an accessible source of energy for his drama, his guilt, or his validation. When you create this distance, you are setting a boundary that says your inner sanctum is no longer open for public viewing or unauthorized entry. You are no longer providing the supply of your reaction, which forces him to stand alone in the silence of his own choices. Without your voice to argue against, he is forced to listen to the echo of his own actions. Without your presence to blame for his discomfort, he is forced to face the reflection in his own mirror. This is where the power dynamic shifts entirely. You are no longer waiting for him to step back so you can breathe. You have stepped back so far that his influence can no longer reach your lungs. This distance is a sanctuary where you begin to detox from the addiction of the relationship. It is the space where the fog begins to lift and you start to see the situation for what it truly was, rather than what you hoped it would be. Many people fear that by distancing themselves, they are losing or giving up. But in reality, you are gaining the perspective required for true healing. You are moving from the front lines of the battlefield to the high ground of the observer. From this vantage point, you realize that much of the pain was maintained by your own proximity to the source of it. Strategic distancing is the quiet, dignified withdrawal of your spirit from a space where it was not celebrated. It is the realization that you do not need to explain your departure to someone who didn't value your presence. As you grow more distant, you become more present to yourself. You start to hear your own intuition again, that quiet whisper that was drowned out by the noise of his demands or the chaos of the heartbreak. You begin to invest that reclaimed energy into your own health, your own career, and your own peace. The confusion he feels is simply the shock of losing access to a soul he took for granted. But your goal is no longer to confuse him. Your goal is to clarify yourself. You are building a life that is so full, so vibrant, and so aligned with your higher purpose that the space he once occupied is now filled with the light of your own self-discovery. This distance is the beginning of your freedom. You are not running away. You are walking toward a version of yourself that is no longer defined by who stayed or who left. You are finally giving yourself the room to grow into the person you were always meant to be. The concept that there is a profound purpose within your pain is perhaps the most difficult truth to swallow when the wound is still fresh, yet it is the most transformative realization you will ever have. When a man hurts you, it feels like a senseless interruption of your happiness, a cruel detour from the life you were trying to build. But if we shift our lens from the horizontal view of human ego to the vertical view of spiritual evolution, we begin to see that heartbreak is often a violent form of protection. It is a divine redirection. Every tear you shed is clearing the vision of a soul that has been looking in the wrong direction for far too long. We often cling to people not because they are good for our future, but because they are familiar to our past. When that person causes you pain, they are inadvertently acting as a catalyst for your awakening. They are showing you, through their actions, exactly where your boundaries were too thin and where your self-love was too quiet. The pain is not there to break you. It is there to break the mold that was keeping you small. It is the friction required to polish the diamond of your character. If you never felt the sting of betrayal, you might never have discovered the depth of your own resilience. If you never felt the coldness of their indifference, you might never have learned how to stoke the fire of your own internal warmth. This is the alchemy of the soul, taking the leaden weight of disappointment and turning it into the gold of wisdom. You begin to realize that you were trying to bloom in a pot that was far too cramped for your roots. The pain is the cracking of that pot. It is uncomfortable, it is messy, and it feels like an ending, but it is actually the beginning of your expansion into the open earth. When you stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what is this trying to grow in me? The power dynamic shifts. You are no longer a victim of a man's choices. You are a student of your own evolution. You start to see that the version of you who accepted that treatment is a version you are now outgrowing. You are vibrating at a new frequency now, one that no longer resonates with the chaos, the lies, or the half-hearted love you once settled for. This is the ultimate confusion for the one who hurt you. They expect you to be diminished by the pain, but instead they find you expanded by it. You have taken the very stones they threw at you and used them to build a pedestal for your new life. There is a sacred timing to your life that transcends human understanding. Sometimes the universe has to remove what is good to make room for what is great. Sometimes a door has to be slammed shut so that you stop standing in the hallway and finally walk toward the open window. This pain is your initiation into a deeper level of consciousness. It is the price of admission to a life of authenticity. You are being refined in the fire so that you can emerge as a person who no longer needs to look outside for permission to be powerful. Trust that the universe doesn't make mistakes with your heart. Every scar is a roadmap to a version of yourself that is wiser, stronger, and more aligned with your divine purpose. You are not just surviving a heartbreak, you are witnessing the birth of your true self. The pain was the labor, but the life that follows is the miracle. You are finally becoming the person you are always meant to be before the world told you who you should be.